Welcome back to The Marketing Factor. I'm your host, Austin Dannerge, the creative director of Cobble Hill. Today, I'm especially excited to welcome an old friend and client of mine, Amanda Greeley. She's the founder of Spence, a racket sports brand that's trying to do something different in a category that's been stuck between club cosplay and legacy performance brands for decades. Before Spence, Amanda led creative direction at Serena and Lily and Cup and held roles at Thelma, which was a client of ours, and Tink and Tiger.
Oh.
She's been thinking about brand retail and what makes people actually feel something for a long time. And I'm excited to welcome you on, Amanda.
It's a hell of an intro. I was really excited to do this. So yeah, let's dig it.
I try to make these intros seem like really profound, so it puts people on the spot and makes them super uncomfortable. But
Shoot, now I have to seem like something, but no, it's all true. And it is crazy for some of us who have watched each other work over 5 or 10 years. There's something kind of cool about seeing, different people who in creative fields progress and think differently and grow. So I kind of feel like we have a little bit of that, like having worked together a bit in the past and then just, continually paying attention over the last few years too.
remember early days, we shot something for a video series called Summer Fridays when you were working on Tink and Tiger. I
Yeah.
feel I feel like Tink and Tiger was one of those brands that was like so kind of ahead of the time. And if it had continued on, it would be
It's funny.
100 million.
It's really funny. I so rarely think about it now because it feels like so far in the rearview mirror. And I think about who I was at that time. And I was making everything in the garment district in New York. And it's funny because that also came about in very, very early Instagram days. I don't even think there was advertising on Instagram yet. It certainly hadn't been acquired by Facebook or Meta. And so, yeah, I mean, there was just so much I didn't know. It wasn't like Warby Parker had launched, there were direct to consumer brands out there, but I was just doing it in a way that was so small and so naive. And I think I had this, if you build it, they will come idea about it. But you're right. I do feel like I was actually a little bit ahead of the trend with just picking an item, a category that I felt like could use a refresher. And at that time, pajamas, there wasn't much going on there. And now you've got brands like Lake who are crushing it. And it's just sort of interesting to see, who knows what would have happened if I had stuck with it a little bit. But, I was doing it in a way where I was making small quantities of stuff in Brooklyn. My margins were bad. I have to cough for a second. I've had this flu for a week. Anyway, yeah, thanks for saying that. I kind of don't think about it now because it's so long ago, but you live and learn.
That's like the entrepreneurial spirit though, right? You're able to shake that one off. Then you started Thelma, which I thought was also that was more in the moment. I felt like great
Yeah, I mean,
shoes.
it's funny, as I get a little older, some people, and now Spence, I guess you could say, is my third thing, and in between, I've kind of consistently consulted for other brands. You start to be like, "Am I a serial entrepreneur?" And I'm like, "Man, I hope not." I don't know that I want to be that, but I think it's not surprising. You get older and you learn. Most people who have some sort of successful brand or business they've built, it's almost never their first go at it. And so I think intuitively, I even saw both Tink and Tiger and Thelma as sort of playground sandboxes for me to test and hone my own intuition about some of this stuff. And there's a reason I kind of didn't, I kept spend as low as I could. And I didn't really bring other people in that I was responsible to because I just was I kind of knew I was going to mess it up in a way, maybe. And so, yeah, but on one hand, I think both, Thelma actually kind of became something and was on its way to doing meaningful revenue. And we were lucky to get picked up by J. Crew as a label they love. And we're getting some good sales through that channel. And ultimately that one kind of, I don't want to say this was the only reason it kind of ended, but my manufacturing partner in Italy went out of business during the pandemic. My dad was really sick at that time. And I also sort of already had Spence in my head. So I just And then it would have been like a hard thing to sell at the stage we were at because, and then also having like the supply chain and the manufacturing like no longer be intact. So like all I really owned was like a little bit of inventory, a brand name. And so I don't know, something about me, like when I'm ready to move on, I'm kind of ready to move on. So I really just like sold through my inventory and took a beat and had already been making Spence decks, since like 2018-ish. So this is like Spence is like a different one in that it was percolating so long before I launched it.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you've been a tennis player for a long time, maybe your whole life,
Yeah.
and
Actually, I have like a mood board in my office, and on here is a really kind of adorable little Polaroid of me. I think I'm 3 years old. And funny enough, I have a red tennis skirt on, which is very Spence because that's our brand color. But my grandparents, I have all kinds of like, I'm like becoming the person with tchotchkes in their office. I have my first tennis racket I ever had in here that my grandfather gave me. And he has this really great cartoonish handwriting. And on the head cover, it's like, remember your old grandpa when you get to Wimbledon. And so, yeah, there's a lot about this concept that's like highly, highly personal, whether people, I don't really talk about it a lot, but there are certainly elements that are very personal, kind of baked into the brand identity. So, yeah, I've played tennis for as long as I can remember. It was sort of like, my parents stuck a racket in my hand when I was 3 or 4 years old, and I took to it. And I'm left-handed, so that was always kind of fun to like be the lefty kid. And then I did the USTA junior playing thing pretty seriously. And then ultimately just kind of became a good high school player, was the team captain of a good team for a couple years. And then I could have, played college tennis at a smaller school, but I ended up at Wisconsin, and people who play at D1 schools are very excellent. And so I ended up playing club tennis there, which was like it was co ed, and it was a lot of kids who were like good high school players continuing to play. So yeah, it's just been a part of my life kind of the whole time. So it's not like I just saw that tennis was getting trendy and thought I'm going to start a tennis brand. Something
yeah, I
I've
was gonna say it's like you're like working through your own history here. We I think I'm older than you. I believe I'm older than you. But we grew up in like the golden era of mall retail,
That's
right?
right. Yeah.
And to me, that's like an element of what's different now, right? Like how much of Spence is you working through your own history versus like I mean, to me it feels new and modern and like futuristic almost, but it also does have this element of like nostalgia to it too.
Well, I mean, like, I think one of the things I love about tennis is like, I think you can talk about tension really beautifully because it's like this really great metaphor to string tension. And so you're nailing it. Yeah. I mean, like, I think two things can be true at once. One is I noticed how many brands in the tennis space were kind of so stuck in the past and kind of continually showing like a country club trope version of tennis that actually just felt really disconnected from the sport I grew up playing.
Mm.
So, like, on that hand, you're like, well, like, what does the future of this look like? How do we do that? But then it's kind of hard, like futurism is a little bit retro at this point too. It's hard to think about futurism and not get a little back to the future, MTV, NASA. There's just things about, I think there's things about being optimistic about the future that actually feel nostalgic at this point. Cause I think we're
Mm.
all a little bit like, what the hell is going on here? And so, again, to make it just like hyper, hyper personal. And that's part of, I think, why like fundraising for this and pitching it, I have to remind myself like that at the end of the day, like everyone else is looking at it just as like an opportunity. But, even the name Spence comes from, the day a friend of mine was like, you should start a tennis brand in 2017. I thought, but like my line of thinking was, I want it to be for both men and women, not sound too girly. And my mom, at somewhere along the way, kind of said if I had been a boy, she was thinking about naming me Spencer, which I always thought was a funny name. On the spot, I was like, Spence is sort of like my boy alter ego version of myself, and I liked that name. The name actually feels a little bit 80s and nostalgic too, but to me, it kind of felt like sport and suspense is kind of in there. And it was just like, man, that fits. And that feels like racket sports to me without having to say something like love this or, like a lot of the things that come into brand names that have to do with this space. So that's how it got the name. And then coincidentally, my dad's mother worked at NASA in the 70s as a nurse. So like some of the NASA futurism references kind of come from me going to their house and them having all of these like commemorative models of the space shuttles in guest room bookshelves. And so like in a way, when I think about my grandparents, and it was my grandfather who said who gave me my first racket, they both like loved sports a lot, but they were also people. They lived in DC, and my grandfather worked in the government for quite a long time. But they were just the type of people who were very optimistic about the future and very not past looking. And so, their whole house was full of mid-century modern furniture. And so weirdly, they became kind of inspiring for this concept as well, because, like again, I got my first tennis racket from my grandfather. My grandmother gave me my first computer. And I was just like, wow, this is like a really funny intersection of things that have informed who I am. And so some of that, yeah, totally fuels the like that tension between what was really great about the past and then being more future looking. And the last part of it is coincidentally the last what they call the golden age of tennis, which is like more people used to play tennis than were runners, was like the late 70s and early 80s. And so sometimes I kind of harp on that like sort of 1980 era because there's a lot of great style references from tennis from that time, but also there was just so much going on in the world and kind of that big shift between the 70s and the 80s was just like a lot changed. And so I'm kind of fascinated with that point in history too.
Yeah, it's funny. There's so many brands that popped up after COVID that are taking the I think of golf a lot. There's so many golf brands that tried to kind of modernize it.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure how they're doing now, it seems like a lot of them cropped up. But to me, tennis, there were some, but I didn't feel like it was getting the attention for how popular a sport it was for what it is. Like, I'm sure that you see other, you're trying to raise money, and I love the fact that like putting you're like you're building it in public, right?
Yeah.
I love like founders building in public. Like you have a Substack, you're much more active on Instagram now than I feel like you were with Thelma or Tink and Tiger from your
Okay.
own personal side of things.
Yeah.
And it's cool to see like it's not like you're showing your failures, but I feel like you're like building in public just makes it more interesting for the customer and for like people to be like, that's cool.
That's interesting you observe that because people on the team are kind of like, "You could be doing so much more," and I think there's something to that as well. But I also feel yeah, I mean, I think there is something about there's an earnestness. I think we can all acknowledge like this is a hard industry. Building anything is hard. And so, you know, I think I'm at a place where I feel like I my intentions are in the right place. I've put a lot of thought into this. So I think like the depth is there in terms of like the why and what the concept is and why I think it should exist. But that doesn't like having a good concept in a growing space does not ensure that it will work or success. And, this
Sure.
is my first time fundraising. And, it's really funny. Like, the levels of like, because like sometimes I feel like I'm about to like Hulk out or something, you kind of like know yourself and you're pretty damn sure that your intuition about like the opportunity in a space is right and you get all this validation, but actually like getting investors over the line to write a check and is just so hard, and learning, especially in the climate we're in now. I think things were very different 5 or 10 years ago for direct to consumer brands. And it's no secret. You talk about that, this, like there was just a window of time where it was much easier to raise money. And there was sort of a formula that worked with digital marketing where, you'd have brands get these pretty big valuations quickly. And then the VCs didn't see the returns they wanted. And so now they're just much more apprehensive about consumer as a category. And so it's just a taller mountain now than it was 10 years ago. But my hope is, and I think smart people think that like if you can build something in this climate, it's much more likely to be sustainable. There was sort of this like time of sort of false hope. I think about like how quickly a brand could become a 500 or $1 million $1 billion brand, and it's just like was a little bit delusional. And so now we're like less delusional, but as a founder with a startup, it's not easy. So you're right. I'm kind of like whatever. I'll show you some behind the scenes stuff, and we're launching a journal on our website which is supposed to do a number of things, but one is just like the conversation we're having is, man, I actually think it would be kind of cool to like intentionally document some of the behind the scenes conversations we have or ways we design certain collections or opportunities that come up. And there's a saturation point with some of that. I think like everyone's got their own shit going on, so they're only so interested, but I guess I'm sort of interested in documenting some of it on the chance that like, there's actually a real story there. I mean, we definitely laugh a lot at Spence. I mean, things go wrong all the time, and if you can't be kind of candid about it, then what are you doing?
Yeah, I mean, I think for anyone that's thinking about starting something, like, your point is you absolutely can. You
Yeah.
just don't expect to feel like a winner right off the bat. I
No way.
mean,
Yeah.
like, the from ideation and what you've done over, it sounds like 7 years of kind of, like, crafting this in your head, that's a lot of thought, and it feels thoughtful too, right? You're able to kind of tie a lot of these different aspects together. Your grandparents
Yeah.
influencing your decision, you can speak to that. I mean, there's a way that I think brands that operate now have to, like, there has to be a purpose to them. And yeah, they might not be $100 million brands, but that's
No, I mean,
okay.
I mean, like, it's totally okay, and I think, not enough people who are thinking about this industry realize that there are, like, very different end goals. I mean, you can build a totally awesome, like, $5 million business with a really small team and, like, not have to raise capital and not have to, like, change your whole life, like, there are ways to be in this industry that are kind of intentionally smaller, and I think for certain categories, there are, like, that's the obvious smart thing to do. I'm sure you know Erin Reitz, who has her beautiful shirting business. She and I have become friendly in the last couple of years, and she's done so many cool things, and she's so deliberate about, like, the type of brand she wants Reads to be, and that it's not supposed to be this, like, massively scaled things. She has a different outcome that she's looking for and is living that, and that's not easy either, but it was totally wacky when kinda everyone just assumes. I think in, like, the post Warby Parker world, it was just like, "I will pick a category, I will disrupt it, it will be worth at least $200 million," and that's just not how it works, so you're right about that.
Yeah, no, I mean, it worked. It worked for a very specific moment in time, right?
It did.
Like, Cobble Hill is a great example. Like, no one was building websites. I mean, they were building websites, but no one was building websites that looked great when we started, and I was like,
Right. But
"That's
we can do
that's
that.
the opportunity," Like, there were, but they were in, like, New York, and, like, some of them have been on this podcast, like Jin Lane, like, who I just, like, admire so much, Emmett and his team. I just, like, had them as inspiration to look towards, and there was like, "Oh, well, there are brands that wanna look good online too," and there's, like, a very now everyone can build a website. I mean, you can
Yeah.
build a website with AI. Brooks Reitz
Yeah.
in his Substack, this was a dagger to my heart, but also I was like, "Hell yeah."
Yeah, right,
He said he built a website with, like, Claude over the weekend, and it was better than anything he's ever paid for, and
right.
he spent a lot of money with Cobble Hill over the years building websites, and I was like,
Yeah,
well, that's, how the industry shifts no matter what it is, marketing,
yeah.
fashion, there's always evolution, and I think you have to be our generation is, like, aware of that, right?
Oh,
I
absolutely.
I
I think
think too.
like it I do like your point about, like, don't expect to feel like a winner fast, like, I think building a brand became a lot more trendy in the social media era as people kind of like, I think wanted to have some sort of like purpose and like be more than themselves and like therefore I will build a brand or something. And I think it's easy to have this idea that you will kind of suddenly like have credibility or be known for that and that it will work. And it's just so removed from reality. Like you really kind of have to be insane, I think, to want because it just takes so much longer and it takes so much more of you. And it's also funny because like in the last few years, especially, I hear a lot of people being like, I want to start a brand or like I've been thinking about this or and then investors also, are quick to be like, well, have you thought about this? And you're like, man, I sure have. Like it's one thing to think about it. It's such a different thing to actually execute and do it. And so that's just one of the funny things. It's like I also joke, like we all want to be idea people. And as I get older, like, man, being an idea person is only takes you so far. Like you have to be able to figure out how to do things. Otherwise you're just over there talking about ideas you have that you're never gonna do.
I'm learning that every day.
Yeah. Sure, I mean, you have a lot of ideas, like you can have one later today and be like, "Oh my god, that would be awesome," you can visualize it, and then you're like, "Fuck, that's gonna take so much work."
The hard thing for me too is like I'm exposed to so many businesses through just the services industry
Yeah,
that I feel I'm like, see what we could do. I know what we could do. I know
right,
how this could be better. But then
right.
it's they know that too. It's the actual execution and doing that on a day-to-day basis is the hard part.
I mean, I this gets, like, a bit philosophical, but probably anyone who is creative I think the big thing is, like, we all quickly see how things can be better, whether that's a website or a brand or, in a particular space or the world. It's just, like, you're kinda leading with this optimistic of, like, "We can make this better." And, again, like, maybe that's sort of like the sickness thing, right? It's like, if you once you see it, you can't unsee it, and it just, like, takes up your mind share, and you get excited about it. And then I think the getting older and more mature thing is, like, it's good to, like, never lose that sort of optimistic dreamer, but you just have much more of a sense of realism about, like, what it really takes to move something, and an awareness, like you're saying, like, yeah, other people are thinking about it too. You're not the only one. Like, that's what we're all kind of doing here.
Yeah, to me, it's almost a pessimistic view, right? I could do better than that.
Yeah, right.
That's the view, but it's maintaining the optimism as you're building something to be like, "I can continue to push this on even when you fail," and be like,
Yeah.
"I can continue to tweak this." We work with a lot of brands in the outdoor industry and some sport. A lot of what I see is brands historically had capitalized on having, like, a team of athletes who would wear their product. I feel like that's a lot more difficult now and more challenging in the influencer era, and especially in the era where it's like startup trying to get the business off the ground, having a team that supports it. How does a new brand like Spence get a foothold? Where are you thinking about that? Are you thinking that you would want like a roster of team members
Yeah.
wearing
I mean,
Spence?
oh, yeah. I mean, you think about this. Yes, I've thought about it. I again, like, the world is changing so much, and it's also interesting to think about, like, where people, like, get their inspiration. So, like, I think the easiest person to give credit to, like, top-down marketing is Nike, who, basically invented the "I wanna be like Mike" idea. And so, it's not rocket science if you put your logo on the most relevant star in your sport, that means something, right? Like, but at the same time, I think a lot of us, even people who play competitive, I think it depends on the sport also. I think different sports have different cultures around them. But, even me, I've played competitive tennis, most of my life, and I still don't necessarily relate to what the most excellent professional player is doing right now. So something I've thought, part of it's just money, right? So, like, to sponsor someone who's at the top of the top, I can't afford that. Candidly,
Yeah.
I've even had, like, a conversation with someone who represents, top players in the world, and they're paying attention to Spence. They think the brand looks cool. They think there's room in this industry for a more innovative, cool brand. Like, people see that, but then just, like, where we are now, the math doesn't work out. So we think a lot, like, I kinda feel like I'm giving you state secrets, but we think a lot about sort of, like, the teaching pro level, and are starting to build out, like, a community amongst teaching pros, because 'cause they're sort of one to many real world influencers who are, like, living and breathing the sport every day and teaching people how to play in major cities around the world. And so I think you've gotta think differently about, like, how you find your customers these days. So, in a nutshell, it's like, again, I think it really depends on, like, the sport you're going after and what the culture is. With tennis, I sort of have this feeling that, like, teaching pros or even people who are playing professional paddle or pickleball are sort of like this 50 feet from stardom. I don't know if you remember that documentary, but there was a cool documentary probably 10 years ago about backup singers in the rock and roll industry, and how, like, they're kind of always around the big, big thing happening, but they're the backup singers. And I think I sort of feel like the teaching pros of the tennis industry are sort of that way. And I think what else is cool about them is they end up often being like more dynamic people with interests beyond tennis. We just went down to the Virgin Islands last week to do a photo shoot with Rosewood Hotels, which was really fun. And the teaching pro down there is a man named Kelvin, who's also a music producer. And like, that's just, to me, that's really interesting is meeting someone who is making a living in tennis, but also is like a completely talented music producer. And so that's, I guess, like in a nutshell, I've sort of built Spence. It's easy to build things where you're kind of like thinking about yourself, I guess, you know? So I think of myself as a creative professional who also like loves and plays tennis and sports. And so, and I think there's a lot of that. Tennis specifically seems to attract a lot of interesting creative types in film and furniture making and art in, you know, just creative direction who also happen to play tennis. And so that to me just feels really rich and interesting. And I don't really see another athletic brand out there bridging kind of like art, creativity, and sport in an
I
interesting.
I love that. It's so cool, so inspiring. I'm a big surfer, and I always look at, like, how surf brands are doing this. I mean, that's my inspiration is what
Yeah.
the surf world is doing, and they've done such a good job with that. I mean, you could say surfing as a sport, but, like, there are pros that are sponsored that work for Billabong or Quicksilver or whatever, but then there are these smaller brands that emerge, and whether they're board short company or
Mhm.
T-shirts or board bags or something, they always blend, like, the creativity of what the personality is of those
Yeah.
team members into it, and one that really stands out to me that I always, like, loved, I think it was, like this was in, like, 2008 or something, there was a brand called Insight, and they had the Jamaican surfers, and this
Yeah.
photographer had these essentially created this campaign with the Jamaican surfers, like, riding, like, a bike underwater, but, like, transposed on just making something different that felt it was, like, above and below the water. It's, like, felt like raw art, and to me,
Like
that
it's thought provoking. I think I'm
it's
not.
thought-provoking.
As much as I wanna be a surfer, I'm not. I, like, definitely wanted to be Kate Bosworth in Blue Crush in 2000. No, but I it's funny, I love being in the ocean, but I definitely am Spence is definitely inspired by surf and skate brands because I think they both of those respective sports have just, like, a counterculture mentality, and I think the way they cut through is by thinking differently, and I felt like, you know, in you kind of posed this earlier, but like a lot of tennis brands kind of seem to fall into the same tropes or be swimming in the same direction. And it's just like, where's that? Where's the counterculture mentality? Where is that, you know, ability to think differently about these sports? And I think the other funny thing that I keep repeating, but like I grew up playing tennis in Columbus, Ohio mostly and kind of played a mix of like country club tennis and public court tennis and USTA tournaments and city tournaments. And it's just like there's such a range of people who play. And then when you kind of look at tennis brands, it all kind of looks the same. And so it was just like, man, what's going on here? So, I mean, I love looking at surf imagery and skate imagery because I just feel like there's always like a grittiness, a rawness, a realness, an ability to be thought provoking that somehow I feel like has been missing in racket sports.
Yeah, there's a real, like, DIY mentality
Yeah.
to surf and skate, and I think that, that can be that you can have that mentality to other sports, and it feels different, it makes sense because of the tropes that generally happen with country club for both golf and tennis, where they're played there, and that's what people associate that with, but I do think that it stands out. So, like, that's a great way of getting, you know, organic press, having a great brand, like
Yeah.
enthusiasm from, other players who kind of like found you on their own. But
Yeah.
how do you take that and build momentum from that for when you're, let's say you're short on resources, right? And Facebook ads are more expensive than they used to be.
Tell
What's
me
your
about.
play what's your playbook for like
I mean,
for
if I had the secret sauce, I would be, you know, somewhere I'd be in a sexier office somewhere. You know what I mean? Like I don't know, but I think you're relying so much on intuition to just be like, I want to do something that feels real. And I do think we're still so small, and you have to remind yourself every day that, like, very few people really know what Spence is. But when I start to get, like, indicators that people are catching on, or, like, there's a group who plays live ball out in LA, and a woman who was running the clinic had some of our red stuff on, and there was just an opportunity where someone's like, "What's that?" And then it's like, "It's this new brand Spence." And then some of the people in the crowd are like, "Oh, I've heard about Spence," you know? And so I think for me, I do, it sounds cheesy, but I do think about, like, meeting players where they are, and I think, like, that's one cool thing about tennis is, like, and racket sports is you kind of, like, can figure out where people are playing, and then you're like, "How can we be there in a guerrilla way?" And again, I think our slight advantage is that this space isn't particularly crowded, and the tennis hasn't really seen its disruptive brand in the last few decades. You know, any so many conversations I've had just indicate that people want it. They want it to exist. They want something new and fresh in this space in the way that they feel like the legacy brands aren't capturing. So, and then there's also like this kind of cool, like, you can't plan for it, but I've heard a lot of times, considering how new we are, the feedback where people are like, "Man, it just feels like Spence has been around longer. This logo feels familiar, the name feels familiar. There's something about it that just feels like it's already existed." I find that super interesting. And the other thing I love to hear that I've heard, more than enough times is like, "Spence makes me want to get back into tennis. Spence makes me want to sign my kid up for tennis." And I've always thought, like, when I was on my, like, living room floor during COVID working on a, like, early 2020, another Spence deck, and, you kinda I had this light bulb moment because early investor types were telling me that the TAM for tennis wasn't big enough pre-pandemic, and I'm just like, "Man, but, like, it's such an iconic sport that's been around for a long time." I have a hard time thinking, like, tennis can't handle a disruptive brand, and so, I the big aha I had first was like, well, what was the TAM for yoga when Lululemon launched in 1998? And best I can tell, it was something like 15 million Americans, which is like nobody. And now, what's their market cap and how many billion-dollar yoga brands exist because, like, they wouldn't have existed if Lululemon hadn't disrupted yoga and made, it used to be people wore like loose, kind of crunchy hemp apparel or dance apparel for yoga. And they were like, no, it's urban, it's cool, it's fitted black pants. It's that, they kind of changed what it meant to be a yogi. And now it's something like 50 million Americans do yoga, but people wear yoga gear to do just about anything. So that was interesting. And then you go back even further, and before Nike, it was really weird to be a recreational runner. It just wasn't something that people did. And so if someone had looked at, like, what's the opportunity for Nike based on the TAM of runners when Nike launched, like, not an idea. And so the big thing I thought was, like, where the real magic lies is if you can not only satisfy an existing group of people who are doing it, but if you can inspire more people to be like, "Why am I not doing that? I feel like I could." And so that's part of the reason it's like big tent racket sports too. I think, like, you can run the gamut of squash and pickleball and padel and tennis and even, like, table tennis. I love ping pong. Throw in badminton in there. A lot of these are Olympic sports, but there's ways to play recreationally as well. And I think, a lot of people who play one racket sport also at least dabble in another. So I think there's just ways to make this whole world feel more inviting and approachable that I don't see the bigger legacy brands doing.
Yeah, totally. I was a tennis player growing up, but also played a lot of squash. Played squash in high school and actually
Awesome.
middle school and high school. And I would just wear a t-shirt and shorts. But, you know, Spence would definitely be something as like a high schooler. I would be like, hell yeah, I want to wear that. That's awesome. Like that's
Yeah.
super cool.
Something I like, I'm critical of us right now. I think it's so hard to create enough content when you're new and small and you're dealing with budgets, but we
Well, I
really
think
need. Yeah.
yeah, 2, you're also with a small team, it's hard to put yourself in I mean, the playbook generally, it sounds like just be like, yeah, at every club, everywhere there's a pro, and be having conversations with them and playing tennis with them, but that,
Really. Yeah.
when you're spinning straw into gold, how do you decide, like, where to put your time? What gets your attention when you're thinking that way?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing, I don't one thing I wish I had done, I don't know if I wish I had done this differently, but I really did so much of this by myself from the like, I didn't have a partner in this. I didn't, like, I think what I was thinking early on is like the concept was compelling enough, the space was growing that I would attract the right investors and like operating partners to kind of like come in and help me birth it. And ultimately, I kind of, kept cobbling together like enough money to keep the train going and decided and like made a call that we were going to launch this business last year. But, like I've been acting as the operator and, founder and creative person and in a way that I think is like not optimum for this concept. And so, just in the last like month have kind of I don't wanna say too much too soon, but, like, think I've found the right person to be the sort of, like, financial operating whiz for this business, and I think it even in a few weeks, it's kind of freed me up to think a little bit differently as I just kind of, like, have someone else to be like, "This is everything as I see it, what should we do here?" Because ultimately, I do think, like, I should be doing things like that. I should be out in the world playing tennis with people in different places, and I should also be really, really hands-on with just, like, the product and creative direction of what this whole thing's about and speaking to it. But, like, when you're just so underwater with just, like, keeping the train running, it can be hard. It can be hard to be doing the thing that you think you actually should be doing.
What do you learn from working for a big company like Serena and Lily that you can apply, and what isn't applicable there?
That's really interesting. I mean, gosh, so much about startups and something established is different. It hasn't been that long since Serena Lily was a startup, but my work for them was so focused on one part, just like looking for gaps in product, being like kind of trend aware of what was going on in interiors and kind of what I felt like was missing or like, man, we should have our version of this and kind of really looking at product and design specifically. And then I also was working with the photo team. That got really interesting during COVID too, because everything had to be done in a studio for some period of time. So there was like a period and the last thing you want to do is make it look too sterile. And so it's really hard to like make studio spaces feel lived in. And there's a really like I can't take credit for this, but there's a really talented like set building team out in California that like, I'd be pulling in references to be like, how do we not make this feel like a set? How do we get some artwork and plants and trim and doors so that it actually feels like believably lived in? How do we beautifully mimic sunlight so that it's like it's kind of like movie magic, right? So my thinking with that with Serena and Lily was always just trying to help them level up the kind of creative like visuals around that brand and then also just be like, hey, we should really be selling a table like this kind of thing and here it is. So it's also just different because I wasn't shouldering like the risk every day with that. You can just kind of like freely have ideas and some of them take hold and some of them don't, and that's great. With this, it's just like you're kind of nonstop responsible for everything, which is just so different.
What about, for Spence, how are you thinking about AI in the business operations side of things? Less of the creative, but more of like how you operate your business.
That's a great question. I mean, it is funny depending on the day of the week you ask me, like I might give you two completely different answers
Yeah.
because like I also this is maybe not what you're asking, but like so far the last year I've been thinking about how I really want to live and work and I for the most part, I don't think remote working is it. I think there's an opportunity to like if you wanna work faster as a brand, I think the more you can do as a team with each other, I think that could be a real competitive edge. So, like, that's a discussion being had internally at Spence as well. And then, like, you didn't ask this, but, like, creatively, it's funny too because it's like you see, like, big brands using AI to create things and the thing I'm realizing is I actually find a lot of that work to be, like, very forgettable. It doesn't stick with me in a way that something that I know is real does. But operationally, I mean, I think you have to just be really open-minded. Like, the short answer is there are clearly tools, and I'm using tools to kind of, like, make myself more efficient all the time. I think we all are. I mean, I think when it comes to ops, I mean, even, like, what Shopify can do now in terms of, like, placing you a mock buy or, like, tracking things on your website and make like, running ads, what's working, what's not. Like, those tools are getting better all the time. So, like, my stupid answer is, like, I'm definitely open-minded to that, but in terms of like how the business operates, speaking of like the nostalgia piece, I've found lately, like I'll be watching movies from the late 80s or early 90s and like can almost like get off on like, oh my God, life seems so much better in a world where you just like wandered down to the breakfast cafe and someone was in there, or like, we had a meeting and then we called somebody. And I sort of start to I do like deep down worry that we're like not living fully and we're missing life because we're spending too much time like optimizing ourselves in ways that are actually silly.
It
So
makes it more stressful, right? Like, when
I
you're
think
constantly
so.
thinking about optimization, there are certainly elements of AI that benefit everyone greatly from everything, every aspect of life, but that's also when you're constantly optimizing things,
Even
it's a
how
real challenge.
we are about like ourselves and wellness. I think there's sort of this like optimization trap. And even like my own algorithm, like you buy one thing and suddenly they're like, you must be more, more fit, more beautiful, more this, more that. You need 20 different things. And you're like, oh my God, like stop. I don't need that.
Yeah. I
Make it
mean, like,
actually,
vitamins,
yeah, I mean,
athletic greens, and then you hear that athletic greens isn't good, so then you're like, "Well, maybe I shouldn't be taking athletic greens," or
that's right.
so you're
Yeah.
just constantly tweaking, but I think that, the general sense from a health standpoint is like, play tennis,
Well,
eat healthy, like.
it was funny. I actually, if I get like, what do I think this whole thing is about? Why do I ultimately believe that racket sports matter or are good? I think two things. Like, I think the brand of wellness that racket sports offers you is uniquely healthy in that you can't really track your progress on Strava. Like, you can't get obsessed with how. You hit a good shot or you didn't. You can watch yourself play, but you're not like, look at my splits. Like, it's not like that. And it's also not something you're doing while you're looking at yourself in a mirror. So you can't be so self obsessed. Like, and I think the mental focus part is like if I go running or if I do yoga, which I do both, but like my mind will drift into like the email I haven't sent or the thing I'm stressed out about. And when I'm playing tennis, like I just can't do that because you have to like literally think about hitting the ball. And so I think there's something unique about the fact that it's social. You have to have at least one other person there to do it. You're mostly outside, but like you're certainly not looking at yourself in a mirror. You're not on your phone. You're not tracking yourself. You just do it. And so that, not to bring Nike into it, but that combined with the idea of just like fun and like fun being truly something that I think matters in, especially in a like chaotic world where we're all stressed out and we all have anxiety. It's like, remembering to have fun is kind of one of those really core human experience things that sometimes gets pushed to the side because we're trying so hard to optimize and be like these bionic versions of ourselves. And it's like, maybe just like try having a good time. Start there. So like honestly, that's a big motivation for like why I think Spence could actually like matter. It's like at the end of yes, we're selling tennis clothes, but I think the storytelling aspect of it and the way you can just inspire people to have like very pure, almost childlike fun. And these are lifelong sports you can do from age 3 to age 85. Like these are all things that I think make it really, really great.
Yeah, I love that. Amanda, you're so awesome. What's like the give me a couple rapid fire questions, like, what's your favorite brand right now outside of tennis space? Who do you love? Who's crushing it?
I really love Jacquemus. I think like I look at them a lot. They get really surrealist and they use AI in ways that I wouldn't. But I think that founder is so creative and took a lot of personal risk to build that too. And just I think they think outside of the box. And so I find them to be very inspiring and reference them even if I don't want to like literally copy or do the thing they're doing. I look at them.
What's the best book you've read recently?
Um, The last book I read was Barry Diller's book,
Oh, cool. I gotta
which
read that one.
yeah, it was good.
Where's the next trip you're headed?
Next trip, I think I'm gonna go out to Los Angeles next. I've spent a lot of time there in the last couple years. The trip we took last week to Virgin Islands was I hadn't done something cool like that in quite a while, so that was awesome. But yeah, I'd say LA is next. And maybe for like a couple weeks too. Like might just kind of half live there for a little bit.
It's a good time to get out of Charleston and go live in
It,
LA for a bit.
I think so.
All right, so where can people find you? What's your Substack? Where can they find Spence?
Well, Spence is pretty consistent across platforms. It's spence.us, both on Instagram and our site is at .us. And then all my stuff is just kind of my name, Amanda Greeley on Instagram and amandagreeley.substack. I'm not that creative with the making of it.
You don't need to be.
Yeah. And maybe that'll make me write more again.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It's great to connect.
Thanks for doing this. This was really fun. All right.